Greetings and welcome to the session. Thanks for coming along. I hope you will sit down and you'll work on something along with me. I'd love to hear what you're working on in the comments down below, and if you're enjoying these sketchbook sessions, please consider subscribing and liking. It helps tremendously. But today I want to talk about talent and skill. These two words that get tossed around a lot when it comes to art making, a lot when it comes to creativity, and any area where people just seem to waltz in sometime and have this overshadowing capacity to just do whatever the thing is, almost as if they were born with it. And a lot of times this is what we look at and we refer to as talent. So as I kind of start pulling these two tendrilled forms apart from one another, I think we have to have some concept of defining the two of them, at least as they relate to one another. And so these might not be the actual definitions, but I think they give us functional definitions as we go to have a conversation about this. So talent seems to be that which you are born with, that which you just have the capacity to do. It's also not a limiting thing. It doesn't mean that like you're born with this level of talent and it just exists there and it can never be augmented. But there are undeniably some people that have talents that other people do not have. Often these present themselves when it comes to things where people usually have to put a lot of time and skill into. And we've seen this in school, I think, all of us in some capacity. The kid who reads faster or better than the others. The kid who understands the scientific or mathematical concepts quicker than the others. The kid who's just a better musician, even though they don't practice that much. What we're seeing in those situations, I think we ought to define here as talent. That is the natural capacity that a person is born with that is unaugmented. So then what is skill? Skill is that which is developed through time, work, and dedication. So for most people, the skill of reading is not something that they have natural talent for. It's something that they have to build up over time. And yet, most people do. The vast majority of people learn the skill of reading, even though some people are talented in that area. So why do I emphasize that? Why do I come to that? Because there's a lot of things in our lives that we look at as talent, and we just assume if we don't have that talent that we are not of the few set aside special people who ought to be able to do that thing or who can do that thing. And it seems really odd to me that we look at it this way. I mean, we've all been sitting in a classroom of some kind and looked at the kid who can draw, or the kid who can paint better than us, or the kid who just understands math, and we kind of sit there and we're like, it comes naturally to him. Like, she's just really good at painting. And we put it in those categories, and I think there's a lot of reasons why we do this, but we have a tendency to do this with specific things and not others, and I'm baffled by how we as humans do this. And not baffled as in like I'm better than everyone else. Like I do this too, but I'm trying to dissect that. I'm trying to break that down and think about it in a different capacity, because I don't think it's always that productive. So we all learn to walk. We pretty much all learn to read. Most of us have learned how to drive by the time we get to adulthood. These are all skills that basically society says you don't have an excuse for not having, even though not all of us were born with the talent to do them naturally. So it makes me wonder, like, what if we lived in a society where not being able to draw was just socially unacceptable? And so those of us that are born with the talent for drawing would be a little further ahead, but it would kind of just be like not a thing. I'm sure there are people that driving comes much more naturally for. I'm sure there are people that talking comes much more naturally for, that writing or reading or walking, all these things that come much more naturally. And yet, we all learn how to do those things. And so we've sequestered the creative arts. We've sequestered music and art to these like fringe areas where we think like, oh, that's only some people. Like, I can't draw, I can't do this. And it's just intriguing because we don't do this with everything. We do this with specific things. And I don't know. I've got some ideas as to why, but I just find it interesting, and I think that's a good place to start. Is just realizing that we do this with some things and we don't do this with others. And I find no evidence to suggest that artistic talent is overpowering in comparison to reading talent. I haven't seen bear out in my own experiences, my own life, over 1,000 students and 11 years of teaching. I've never seen it borne out that people can't learn artistic things. I've had extremely untalented kids show up to my class who are terrible drawers or painters learn how to make things that are beautiful. And for some kids, that takes a lot longer, but I have not run into someone who was incapable of doing those things. Every student I've ever had that was capable of reading and writing has also simultaneously been capable of learning how to produce beautiful things if they put in the time. So I think I just want to start with that we ought to be careful. We ought to not sequester ourselves and be so demeaning to our human abilities to assume that just because we weren't born with the talent and we've run into people that were, that doesn't mean that we can't do the thing. Now, I think real quickly I have to get into the idea of natural talent. There are a lot of people in the artistic community that talk about natural talent and the fact that it doesn't exist. And I disagree. I could be wrong. I'm not arrogantly or pridefully disagreeing, but I do disagree from my own personal experience. I think natural talent does exist, and I think we see it all the time in the things that I discussed earlier, but also just I think every one of us can conjure a situation where someone in our life was presented with something for the first time and they just got it. It just made sense to them. You know, they run into algebra for the first time. They were terrible with math up until that point, and algebra just clicks. Well, algebra is complicated, and if you haven't done a lot of mathematics training, you're not necessarily going to run into those concepts in other components of math. I've run into this with students that have started playing an instrument where they didn't play anything, like no musical knowledge at all, and it just clicks for them. It just makes sense. And I've run into the kids that struggled drawing, but when they finally hit painting and take it on with a vengeance, they just go, and it's wonderful to see. So no, I do not believe that natural talent is a myth. I think natural talent exists. I think it matters a lot less than we think it matters. I know for me, a lot of my natural talents have to do with organization, with structure, with memory, and with music. But I'm not as skilled a musician as I am an artist or a teacher because I simply haven't put the time in. And I'm actually a terrible teacher with music because it comes naturally to me, because it is instinctive in a way. So I have natural talents. Everyone around me seems to have natural talents. And ironically, natural talents seem to not often tie into what we do as a profession. In fact, one of my colleagues who was one of the best math teachers I've ever worked with, math was really hard for him growing up. He was not a good math student growing up. He learned to love it. He learned to fall in love with it. And because it was a struggle for him, he has so much more empathy for his kids and for his students. So I think natural talent, I think it exists. Plain and simple. I could go on and on. I think there's a lot of evidence for it, but I just want to have that out of the way too. I'm curious though, if you are, where are you with this? If you think that that natural talent does exist or doesn't exist, I'd love to hear about it in the comments down below. So I'm in this position where I believe that natural talent exists, but that skill matters more. And I think this is just borne out in most of our experiences in life, and certainly in mine as a teacher, is the areas that everybody puts time into naturally develop. And this is just kind of logical. And it's why practice is one of those things that we as teachers just harp on so much. Because what you put time into, you are going to improve at. You know, if you want to be better at a sport and you play that sport a lot, you're gonna get better at it. If you want to get better at drawing and you draw a lot, you're going to get better at drawing. Now, there's also a misnomer there as well, where people love to push this phrase that practice makes perfect, and it's just not true in any capacity. What practice does is practice cements habits, and practice makes better. So whatever it is that you're doing, whatever you're doing with your practice, you are emphasizing and reinforcing the things that you do in that practice. So if you are practicing figure drawing, and that's all you do for your practice, you are going to get better at the very specific things that you are practicing in that figure drawing practice. It's a lot of practice in that sentence. But you're not going to get better at drawing necessarily. You might, but you're only guaranteed to get better at the one thing you're doing. So practice doesn't make perfect. Practice just makes better. I think that's a better way to say it. It also dismantles some of the potential pressure that you give yourself when it comes to practice. If you're really processing and thinking that practice makes perfect, and then you've been practicing for a long time and you're certainly not perfect yet, it can be easy to go down a negative path in your mind and think, man, like, what am I doing wrong? Am I really just not going to be able to do this? So practice makes better, and practice can be really beneficially constructed in a way where it hones exactly what it is that you are trying to hone. So the drawing that you're seeing in the background here, is this practice for me? Well, yes, I think it is. But it's not quite as detailed of practice as a lot of my practice is. This is practice on drawing from imagination. I have no references for what I'm doing. I didn't even have an idea when I sat down. I just started making things. And the idea already at this point has shifted 4 or 5 different times. So the very specific thing that I'm practicing here is drawing from imagination, drawing without a plan, drawing in low stress environments, and also just playing with the brush pens because I have a lot of fun with them and I think they're a blast. So, given those things, is this practice achieving its purpose? Yes. It shifts several times. I have several issues I run into, and I managed to solve most of them in a way that is satisfactory to me. Is the drawing perfect? No, the practice hasn't made this drawing perfect. But if I go back and I look at some of the first things that I started doing in this train of thought, where I'd sit down with brush pens and just start making things, my recent drawings have been far better than the older ones. And so practice is making better. The skills that I'm working on are getting better. Now I practice in this capacity adjacent to other practice. I also have several other pieces I'm working on that are largely from reference. So I'm practicing all these different things. All of this to say that skills are more important than talent. And practice reinforces and builds skills. So practice should be something that we build into our lives, build into our habits in a consistent way, if we really want to continue to go down the path of artistic growth. Skills also give us a good foundation for our creativity. Exploring different things and practicing different skills will naturally build in this just plethora of ideas and concepts and backlogged information that we can then draw upon later. Most creativity doesn't come out of a vacuum. It comes out of things. It comes out of practicing. So this piece is undeniably creative. Whether it's good or not is up to a lot of interpretation. But the piece is undeniably creative. It's interesting. It's weird. It's an eye inside of roots or tendrils or something. Like it's just this weird amalgamation of things. But that creativity comes out of the practice. It comes out of the skills I'm working on. As my skills continue to increase, the things that I can realize, the ideas and concepts that I can actually pull out of my head or can pull from multiple references and put onto paper or canvas, increases. So focusing on the skills and developing skill, not relying on talent, allows for creativity to increase. In that same train of thought, there are people whose skill or natural talent is thinking up weird ideas or new ideas. In fact, I would say this is probably one of my talents. I'm pretty good at just coming up with random ideas. And this presented itself in a lot of my teaching, where I would just come up with random warm-ups all the time. And I can't count how many times people ask me, students or colleagues, how do you come up with all these ideas? How do you just conjure 6 different warm-ups every single day? Do you devise them all ahead of time? How do you do this? And I never really had a good answer, because I can always just kind of go into the weird factory that is my brain and pull things out and amalgamate them and juxtapose them and get these weird ideas. And that was just something that was easy for me. So that is one of my talents. But the frustrating part of my talent is coming up with these ideas, and I don't necessarily always have the skills to actually do something with that. So skills are essential to bringing the ideas and the creativity to life. And though talent may give you the ability to see the thing in your mind, you're not going to be able to realize it truly without the skills. And so focusing on the skills in conjunction with your talent or in, opposition to your talent is what's going to allow you to come up with more creative things and actually see them realized on whatever your chosen media is. Now, this takes a long time, and I think this is part of the reason. I think there's two main pieces, and this is certainly the more positive of these two, so I'll start here. But I think that one of the main reasons why people will often look at other humans who are talented in an area or have skills in an area and just go, well, I can't draw like he can or like she can because I don't have the talent, I don't have the skill. Regardless of what you're referring to, I think most people are looking at that situation, and whether they realize it or not, they're looking at the quantity of time and effort that would be required for them to develop that skill, and they're essentially, whether consciously or unconsciously, going, I don't want to do that. And so when people, I've always thought about this. When people walk up to somebody who's extremely good at playing an instrument, for example, and they say, oh man, like I wish I had this skill. I wish I could do what you do. I wish I could play violin like that. I've always kind of thought like, no, you don't. Like you kind of do. Like you like the idea. You like the idea of being able to play violin this well. But do you really wish that you had spent 20 hours a week practicing the entire time you were in high school? Well, probably not, because you didn't. You spent time on other things. And I think maybe that's a little pessimistic of me, and maybe it's just the human, like, oh, like I want this thing. It feels like, if somebody just handed me the skills, like I would lovingly take them. And I get that. It's not realistic, and perhaps I'm just too literal and too logical in how I approach things. But I've always kind of wondered that. I think one of the biggest reasons why people have segregated talent and skill as these unattainable things, and why skill often gets attributed to talent, is because unconsciously, I think most of us know that the amount of persistence and resilience that we would need to develop those skills is just immense. The amount of time that it takes to become a proficient drawer or a proficient painter is immense. Like you can learn how to paint some things pretty quickly. Like you could go to a painting class and learn how to paint some cool things pretty quick. And that's the weird part about artistic growth. And maybe it's the weird part about skill growth in general, is that you can often develop like the baseline skills very quickly. You can learn how to drive a car in like 15, 20 minutes, but learning all the ins and outs of all the rules, learning how to do it under pressure, learning how to do it when you're processing something else or there's somebody else in the car talking to you, well, now that's a more complicated thing, and that's going to take time to figure out. So, art is that way too a lot of the time. And I think that realistically, we understand that the amount of time that you're going to have to put into the thing is just immense. And a lot of us don't want to do that. We would like to have those skills if somebody could download them into us like they did in the Matrix. But I think one of the biggest reasons that we attribute it to talent or skill is because we just don't really want to consciously acknowledge the quantity of time that it would take to get there. And that actually kind of goes into the other reason, the more negative reason, I suppose. And this just comes from me being a little bit more pessimistic, is I think that often we can look at people who are better at a skill than us, and we want to categorize it. We want to claim that as being their talent, something that they were born into, because to realize that it's actually just skill they built over time is to realize that we've wasted time. It's to realize that we have that capacity or that ability and we've made other choices. And that's hard. That's hard as a human to realize, like, I didn't make the choices that made this possible. And, now I'm behind. Now, if I really want to catch up with that person's writing capacity or their drawing capacity, I'm going to have to put in a lot of overtime to get there. And that's hard. And I think often we trick ourselves. It's easier as people to just go, well, man, like I'm just not talented like he is. It's like, well, maybe, or maybe he just put way more time into it than you. Maybe she was born with this natural ability, but like that natural ability didn't take her from age 6 to 26 to professional character designer. No, it maybe gave her the teeniest bit of a head start, but she's put in the time. And don't dismiss that time. And that's one of these weird things that happens, and I think is something that's a little bit detrimental to our understanding of other human beings. When we put people in a category and we just assume that these amazing artists we look at are talented, they were born with this, we're kind of also dismantling all of the hard work that they put into it. We're disregarding that. And we're not giving them credit for the fact that they've put in extraordinary amounts of time. You know, when I listen to Trent Kaniga sometimes, and by the way, if you don't know, he's an amazing artist. He worked for Blizzard for a while, and he owns his own game development studio / art studio. And he's here on YouTube too. Go check him out, please. He's a wonderful human being. But Trent often talks about how when he was like 17, he wasn't going out and hanging out with his buddies. He wasn't playing video games. Like, he was staying home and working on developing his own indie comic. And he sacrificed enormous amounts of time. Now, it would be easy to look at his art and just be like, oh, like, I wish I could do what he does. You know, I wish I had that. He's so talented. But the reality is that's undermining all the hard work he put in. You know, he's probably in his mid 40s now, or early 40s. Sorry, Trent, if you're watching this, I don't think you're super old, but I know you're older than me. So he's put in like almost 30 years of hard work into this. And so to start drawing and a year or two in be like, why am I not as good as him? Well, he must be just like talented. No, he's got more hours in than you. And probably not just more hours, but better hours. So it's a little bit more like pessimistic angle to look at it from, but I think it's true, and I'm guilty of this as well. This isn't just a like pointing out all of the plebeians and whatnot. I'm guilty of this as well. And I'm trying to realize it in myself, because when I give other people the credit that they deserve, I think that it makes them more human to me, and it makes me more human as well. And we all need a little bit extra grace. Plus, there's a beneficial aspect to this as well. Realizing that everyone else that's better than you predominantly has just put in a mountain more work than you can be intimidating, but it can also be really encouraging, because it can remind you that you can get there too. It's just about climbing that hill. And yeah, there are people that are at the top of the hill already, but that doesn't mean that there's no space at the top. And it doesn't mean that you can't get there. It just means that you're going to have to start putting in the time and the effort. So, like, what do we do with this? I feel like if this is the first time you've heard this kind of information, I'd be a little bit surprised. But I feel like sometimes we can pontificate and break down all these complicated things and just ramble. But I think it's also beneficial to kind of consider, what can you actually do with this information? What can be achieved by it? So, first of all, understanding that talent exists is, I think, a beneficial thing for us. It gives us a better understanding of reality, the world we exist in, and hopefully can break down some potential envy of the people that start off better than us. We each have our own talents, and they go in different capacities in different areas. But also understanding and remembering that skill is primarily developed means that we all have the capacity to pick a direction and start moving in that direction. It is conceivable that other people might be too far ahead of us, that we'll never actually catch up with them, especially if they were gifted with talent from the beginning. But that doesn't mean that you can't make it significantly down that journey, down that path, by skill and practice alone. And I've seen this bear out in most areas in my life. I've approached very few things where I wasn't able to make significant headway by just practicing and consulting experts. But it's usually just a massive, massive quantity of time. And I think that if you play video games, it might be beneficial to look back at some video games that you tried to play that were ludicrously difficult and felt impossible at first. And eventually, if you look at like how you play them now, oh, wow, like you're proficient. But go look at how many hours you've put into those games. You know, when I first started playing Monster Hunter, I was terrible at it. Well, I'm pretty good now, but, you know, I don't necessarily want to talk about all the hours I put in those games. And so I've tried to take that information, and then I look at how much time I put into my art and try to look at the similarities between those. You know, if I put 1,000 hours into a video game and I'm now very, very good at it, how long does it take me to put in 1,000 hours of art time? Or am I being lazy and I'm doing other things? And it can be motivating for me, at least, to be like, okay, cool. Like, if I really want to get better at art, like, I've just got to put in the hours, and I've got to put them in semi-wisely. And that's kind of encouraging. And so I hope that the takeaway from this is just be encouraged. Like, your skills can be developed. It's just going to take time. And even if you're like me, where you're in your mid-30s, like, that's fine. Like, presumably, I've still got 20 or 30 years of life left. And the lovely part about art is that until my bones and my joints and my muscles all go out, I can still make things. And I plan to. I plan to keep doing this forever. I think it's good for my soul. I think it's good for people around me. I think I'm a better father and a better husband and a better friend because I make art and because I create things. And I know now that my skills can continue to be developed, and I'm seeing that. I see that in real time. Not like real time as in like, today I grew 1%. It's not like watching your leveling up in an RPG. But what it is like is it's looking back over the last couple months and going, man, like that painting was pretty good, or that came along faster, or I'm noticing rim lighting a lot better and a lot more quickly on things. It's things like that. So I hope you take some benefits from this, and if not, I hope you just kind of enjoyed the discussion and the conversation. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you would like me to chat about in the next session. If I get some cool feedback, then I will happily take that and roll with that. So whatever your suggestion is, whether it's something I've talked about before or never before, please leave it in the comments, and I will try to hit it in one of the next sessions. So I hope you're having a wonderful day. Have a good one, y'all. See you soon.